Okay, this is fifth grade, numbers and fractions, 7th standard. We're talking about division of fractions. We first need to understand fractions as division. All fractions are division problems. When we see a fraction, we need to acknowledge fractions as possible division problems. When we see a fraction, for example, 3/6, or as most students say, 3/6, understand that if I wanted to turn this into a division problem, I could by doing numerator divided by denominator. Now this is a proper fraction. How do I know that? The top number is smaller than the bottom number. So when we have a proper fraction, we most likely tend to pick up that calculator, and that's fine, that's fine. When it's improper, if this was 6/3, I would expect for you to use long division, because 6/3 translates into 6 divided by 3, and that's 2. And those are easier to do. We're used to our dividend being bigger than our divisor. So these I would expect for you to divide by hand, but if you were dividing or simplifying a proper fraction, I'll allow the use of the calculator. When we talk about dividing fractions by whole numbers, there are 5 steps you need to remember. The first 3 ought to be fairly easy to remember. 4 and 5 as well. Steps 1, 2, and 3 all involve an acronym. How many of us has ate at KFC before? Well, if you have or haven't, you've heard of it. Instead of thinking KFC, think KCF. The K says keep the first fraction the same. So if I had an example problem, if I did 1/4 divided by 2, okay? Step 1 says keep the first fraction the same. So when I keep something the same, I do that by just bringing it down. Step 2 says change the division to multiplication. So where you see division, put a multiplication symbol. Step 3 says to flip the second fraction. Oh, I've got a whole number. It's not a fraction yet. Well, how do I make it a fraction, Mr. Gray? And I'm going to say to you, you should remember, anytime we have a whole number, to make it a fraction, we add a fraction bar and put a 1 up under it. Now it's a fraction. Now I can flip it. The reciprocal, or the flip version of 2/1 is 1/2. Those are the 3 steps. Step 4, multiply straight across. Well, we're used to doing this with multiplying fractions. 1 times 1 is 1/4 times 2 is 8. Step 5 says to simplify. Well, I know it's a unit fraction, so anytime there's a 1 in the numerator, it's already simplified. This is a proper fraction, so if I wanted to try to simplify it, I need to set up my bridge and find factors. Why am I doing this? Because the top number is smaller. If the 8 was on top, I would expect for you to do long division. Okay? When I find the factors of 1 and 8, the greatest common factor is 1. I know that if I multiply or divide anything by 1, it's not going to change anything. Okay? It'll still be the same. Make sure you're copying this. Okay? Let's do another one. For some reason I can't find my eraser. Let's do another example. Again, we're dividing fractions by whole numbers. Let's do another one. I have 1/6 divided by 12. Okay? Step 1 is to keep the first fraction the same. I do that by just bringing it down. Step 2, change the division to multiplication. Step 3, flip the second fraction. Again, it's not a fraction yet, it's still a whole number. You need to first make this whole number a fraction by adding a fraction bar and a 1 in the denominator. Now I can flip it. The reciprocal of 12/1 is 1/12. Step 4 is multiply straight across. We're used to this. This is the way we've been multiplying fractions. Do not confuse multiplying straight across with cross multiplying. We do that when we're adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. 1 times 1 is 1, and 6 times 12 is 72. I know that's a proper fraction, so if I was going to try to simplify it, I'd need to do it like I done the last example by setting up my bridge and finding factors. If the 72 was on top and the 1 was on the bottom, I would use long division. Okay, so don't make that mistake. You divide fractions the exact same way, even if a whole number wasn't present. So for example, if both of these were fractions, you would keep the first fraction the same, change the division to multiplication, and flip the second fraction. It's a fraction already, so now I can flip it. Now I multiply straight across. 1 times 3 is 3. 6 times 1 is 6. That's a proper fraction, and I'm going to try to simplify it because it looks like it'll simplify. I set up my bridge for the factors 3 and 6. 1 times 3, 1 times 6, and 2 times 3. What's the greatest common factor? 3. I take my fraction, divide 3 into both the top and the bottom. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 6 divided by 3 is 2. It simplifies into 1/2. And that is how we divide fractions by whole numbers. And of course the example that illustrates how to divide fractions by fractions. Make sure if there's any relevant vocabulary that you're unfamiliar with, that you get them down, define them, see me for clarification. I expect this to be copied in your notebooks. Also do the follow-up activity and keep up with your Math Games assignments. Stay tuned for the next lesson that illustrates how to divide mixed numbers.